think so, yeah.
Good.
Seems like their dads liked them an awful lot. Of course, Jacob had more to love, I guess, but more sons to love. I don't think he loved them all. He loved some more than others, apparently.
Apparently. Well, let's open with prayer and we'll go ahead and get started. Father, it's good to get together with friends, church family, loved ones to study your word. We just ask that you guide our thoughts and our hearts in the way you'd have us go, that we learn by reading and discussing the word. Just be with us tonight, and we give you the praise for it in Christ's name. Amen. I thought when I sent the text that we would hit the highlights, that I could just buzz through this and highlight, but there's too much there. I don't think I can buzz through it as quick as I thought I could. In fact, I want to start off and read chapter 37 and hit some of the highlights and parallel as we go. Genesis 37, and Jacob dwelled in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wife. And Joseph brought unto his father an evil report. What was the evil report? We don't have a clue, do we? Or I couldn't find anything in him. It doesn't tell, but it was about the four sons that are mentioned. That's Dan and Asher, and I've got those written down somewhere. But anyhow, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah.
I don't think it says there, but I always took it that was part of why they didn't like him, because he's not only full of himself, I guess they thought, as you read forward a little bit.
Yeah.
That he's kind of tattletale. I always thought they must not be treating him right. He went and told his daddy, and they didn't like that, but I may be wrong about that. I mean, that's just what I read through the lines, but I don't disagree. It doesn't say what the evil report was.
Right. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all the children, because he was the son of his old age and made him a coat of many colors. And, in the rest of this, he talks about Benjamin being his son of his old age, so he changed along the line. But anyhow, is there a parallel in verse 3 with stuff that went on with Christ?
We think of God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Now, Joseph wasn't his only begotten son, but we talked about who he loved or how he loved him, but
Yeah.
it just seemed like he favored Joseph for some reason. As of course, God only had the one son. Besides that, we're all God's children, I guess, if you look at it that way.
Joseph had a coat of many colors, which made him stand out. And Christ, on the day of his crucifixion, they cast lots for his clothes because he had a special tunic that was woven without seams. So they both had special coats or clothing. And that talks about that in Matthew chapter 3, verse 17 of it, that they cast lots for his clothes.
Maybe I'm throwing a question there, since I've always wondered, he was beaten and whipped and everything else, and he must not have had those clothes on when they,
Most of the time when they crucified, the people were stripped of all their clothing and was hung up naked. verse 4, when his brothers saw the father loved him more than all the brethren, they hated him and couldn't speak peaceable to him. And Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers, and they hated him yet more. As we go through this, I think they repeat that, and they hated him all the more, or hated him more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaves arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaves. And his brother said unto him, Shall thou indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. Joseph basically has made this prophecy, and they're calling it a dream, but it's a prophecy. And as we see, it'll come true. And verse 9, and he dreamed yet another dream and told his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told his father and to his brother, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brother indeed come bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brothers envied him, but his father observed the saying. And I love when stuff is repeated again in the New Testament. In Acts 19, Acts 7:19. Acts 7 is the martyr of Stephen, and Stephen goes through the history, and he repeats this, that his brothers envied him. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brothers feed? I left out a verse or two. And his brothers envied him, but his father observed the saying, and his brothers went to feed father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brothers feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said, Here am I. And he said unto him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it is well with the brethren, well with the flock, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the fields, and a man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? Kind of makes him sound like he's lost and doesn't know, which ends up or anything. Makes him sound stupid, really. And the man said, They departed hence, for I heard them say, Let's go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren, but found them in Dothan. And when they saw him far off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, the dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into a pit, and we'll say some evil beast devoured him, and we shall see what comes of the dreams. And Reuben kind of steps in and tries to save himself. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into a pit in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, and deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass, when Joseph come unto his brother, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that he wore, and they took him and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, Gilead, and there were camels bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Have we gone through any more parallels? I heard a guy talk about this one time, and I picked up several parallels then, and then if you read in Hunt Farm, there's a lot of them. The brothers sat down and went ahead and eat their lunch, and when the Roman soldiers put Christ on the cross, they sat down to watch to see what happened. So you draw a parallel there.
I think his own brothers plotted to kill him. I guess you could say his Jewish brothers plotted to kill him.
Yep.
Before the crucifixion.
Yep. Their brothers rejected both of them. Anything else that you think of, or questions or comments?
Well, I would think if Reuben, you said he stepped in to save his life, but he could have stepped in and said, we can't do this to our own brother, right? I mean, I guess a lot of them are half brothers, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Obviously, they already resented him, and obviously, the only thing I can think of when I was reading the whole thing is, this is God's plan, you know, obviously, that comes to fruition at the end of the book, but it's like, we talked about it before, it seems like a long way to get there, you know? And could you come up with a little better plan? But again, I mean, you know, who am I to say differently, obviously, but it's just interesting to me to think the steps and the decades they had to go through to accomplish what God wanted to accomplish.
And some of the stuff that happens, why is that in here? We don't need to know these things, but.
And then the evil that brothers did to evil, or each other, Cain and Abel,
Yeah.
Jacob and Esau,
Yeah.
you know, all these brothers apparently were one in their dislike and hatred of Joseph. I mean, there's 10 or 11 of them, I don't know, is there 13 total or 12 total, including Benjamin?
12 total.
Including, so they're, right at this point, there's 10 in Joseph, or Benjamin's not around yet.
Right.
We're old enough to
Right.
participate in this.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly how many are out there, I guess, but it doesn't really.
Didn't say which one.
Yeah, it just says brother.
But at least we know Reuben and Judah's there.
Right.
And the Ishmaelites that they sell them to is Abraham's descendant by Hagar.
One awful thing to do to your own dad. You go back and tell him, hey, your brother's dead. Oh, what, how do you think that's gonna go over?
Well, I don't think they had a conscience because they're sitting there after they've got him in his pit. They're sitting there eating lunch like
No big deal.
no big, no big thing.
It's, well, it's just, yeah, little things kind of hard to comprehend.
Another, about putting him into the pit, all practical purposes, they're putting him to death, just like they put Christ to death. And then when they take him out of the pit, it's a symbol of resurrection. And it's hard to grasp, but, I know I've thought today, how can people sell another person? But these guys sold their own brother, their own family. And then sit down and eat. In verse 26, and Judah said unto his brother, what profit is it if we sell or slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hands be and let not our hands be upon him. He's saying now, oh, this is our brother, we ought to kill him.
Well, that's the interesting point. You talk about Reuben saving his life, but if he's putting him in the pit, he's actually going to suffer a worse death than he might have. I'd rather, be shot or stabbed or whatever they're gonna do to him, beat to death and starve to death, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe not, but.
Maybe is Reuben, I mean, this is speculation, but is Reuben feeling bad because he had relations with one of, his other,
Bill Law.
is he feeling bad about that, and that's what he's trying to make up? I know there's a lot of things you can think about why he's doing that, but.
Yeah. And it does say Reuben intended to go back and lift him out and deliver him to his father, but, Judah comes up with another plan without Reuben knowing about it. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand not be upon him, for he is our brother in our flesh, and his brethren were content. Then there passed Midianite merchants, and they drew and lifted Joseph up out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. And they sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver, but here they sell Joseph just for 20, which is a put down to Joseph. He's not even worth the price of a slave.
I thought that was inflation.
That's what I was thinking.
Inflation.
The going price at this time was, as I've read history stuff, it was 30 pieces of silver. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes, and he returned unto his brothers and said, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And he took Joseph's coat and killed the kids of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. Does that sound familiar? Another deception by a goat, or by a kid goat. You know, Jacob and Rebekah had already deceived Isaac that way. So what goes around comes around quite often. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, this have we found. Know now whether this is the son's coat or no. And he knew it, and said, it is my son's coat. Evil beasts have devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt rent in pieces. Then Jacob rent his clothes and put on sackcloth upon his lawn, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and said, for I will go down into the grave into my son's mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him to Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. Anything else on chapter 37? 38 is one of those chapters I'm not sure why is in there, and all the information's in there.
I mean, these are the patriarchs of the Jewish race, and their father is in deep mourning, and so he may mourn until his death. I mean, come on. Do you have any love for your father, right?
But all the people that's mentioned in this chapter, the four is Judah, Tamar, Perez, and Zerah. And if you look at Matthew chapter 1, that's the genealogy. And verse 3, and Judah begot Perez and Zerah of Tamar, and Perez begot Esron, and Esron begot Adam. So they're in the lineage of Christ. And, we know what happened in 38. And so what are we supposed to learn from that, Jack? That chapter.
None of us are perfect.
That's, and God uses imperfect people. He can still use them, although all the bad things went on. say about chapter 38 unless you have something else.
Well, it's interesting reading, you know.
It is. And, you know, that goes on, what they call the levirate vow. If your brother dies and the next brother in line is supposed to marry his wife and have children in his name. And anyhow, they didn't go along with that so well, and they done different things to get around it. Chapter 39.
Well, and then he broke the Levitical law too before we, you know, marrying this Canaanite. You know, I think, I didn't go back and look at that, but I think that's a no-no, and they're,
Yeah, they're not supposed to marry out of the Jewish. Tribe or whatever you want to call it. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, and Egyptian, bought him out of the hands of the Ishmaelites, and had brought him down anyhow. Go through all that, and tells what he does. And another thing, as you go through this chapter, you find that they figure out the Lord was with Joseph, and whoever he's with is blessed. But Potiphar's wife had eyes for David, or for Joseph, and Joseph wasn't having it, and she lied about Joseph, and like all the people lied about Christ, and that pretty well kind of covers that, you know. But
getting back to Joseph comparative to Jesus. You know, we know Jesus was taken to Egypt briefly, I believe it was Egypt, by Joseph and his mother.
Yeah.
Till the king, whoever the king, I didn't look at that either, but they were afraid that they might try to kill him.
Yeah.
So that's another, I guess, parallel maybe that you.
I missed that one. And Joseph ends up in jail, and then in chapter 40, Pharaoh's baker and butler ends up in jail, and they have a dream, and Joseph interprets his dreams, and he gets it all right down to the baker's death, and the butler being restored back to cupbearer actually is what butler meant there. And Joseph tells the butler, remember me, you know, put in a good word for me, Pharaoh, and get me out of prison. And it doesn't happen.
And I wonder what Joseph is thinking at some time. Because it continues to say the Lord was with him, and the Lord was with him, and the Lord blessed him, but he's gone from, you know, apparently a pretty nice life there with his father and 11 brothers who were very wealthy by those terms.
Yep.
Now he's in a foreign country without family, and then he's doing pretty well, but then he's in jail. But he never cursed God and gave up, never says he even really did anything too far out of line. I don't think he was without sin, but can't draw that parallel with Christ, but he doesn't talk about any sin that he had.
That's something that I find. I don't know anybody else in the Bible besides Christ that some sin's not brought out that they've done, but nothing's brought out against Joseph. So it's you know, and prison now. But then while he's in prison, the Lord blesses him there, and the chief of the prison makes him first in command over the prison, basically. And,
getting back, I guess, to the, fleshly part of man, he was blessed by this dream. I'd be the first thing I would say after I got out, hey, this guy's, he's got direct contact, obviously, with Pharaoh, maybe try to help the guy out. I mean, don't you have any, feel like you've been blessed by Joseph, as you say, like the jailer did? I just, sometimes, I guess maybe that's just the heart of man. Maybe we're all like that. I don't know, it seems like it's rough. Joseph taking a pretty rough road here. I think I'd be starting to hate every man. I wouldn't be trusting too many men. But I guess he did trust the Lord.
and that, if I was in that position, what would I have done? And I guess maybe that's what it's supposed to make us think of. And then Joseph's in prison in chapter 41, and Pharaoh has a dream, and nobody can interpret it, and tells about the 7 kinds that come up and they're fat and good, and then 7 other kinds come up and they're ill-favored, and they actually eat the other 7, but you can't tell they ate anything, so they're still ill-favored. And then he has the dream about the 7 ears of corn, 7 good ears, 7 bad ears, and all that, and nobody can interpret it. And finally the butler remembers, oh, Joseph interpreted my dream in prison, so he tells Pharaoh. Pharaoh sends for him. They clean Joseph up, shave him, put good clothes on him and stuff, and he goes before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him all the dream, and Joseph can interpret it, and the 7 fair and goodly kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of corn are 7 years. And he says the dreams are the same thing, the same outcome. And the 7 good are 7 years of bountiful harvest, and then the bad ears and bad kine are 7 years of famine. It goes on, and Pharaoh makes him, because he interprets the dream, and Joseph said, you need to find somebody to handle all the affairs of the good years and store food and for the 7 bad years, and Pharaoh ends up making Joseph that man, and makes him second in command after Pharaoh. And how many times through the Bible does that happen to people that don't lose hope and don't turn their back on the Lord? That they become great people in our eyes.
And from what I can read through the line, the Egyptians didn't have much use for the Hebrew people either. So for them, and they knew he was Jewish, or Hebrew, whatever. But yet he still rose to that promise. And then they had their gods, right?
Oh yeah.
The Egyptians had a lot of gods, but
Yeah.
they apparently could see that his God was the one blessing him, I suppose. Or, I don't know, put fear in him, but they certainly had respect for him because of his God was blessing him.
Yeah.
And I think you're on as far when Pharaoh gave the Israelites land, they wanted to separate because they didn't like shepherds or keepers of flocks, it seems like, yeah, they definitely didn't like them.
Right.
And that, I think that was the way they kept, God probably wanted it that way, he didn't want them intermingling, I guess, you know, they're all living in their own little tribe there in Egypt.
And then, of course, Joseph continues to give God the glory even when he interprets the dream. He says,
Yeah.
it wasn't me, it was God that
Yeah.
gave you this insight or this
And-
gift or whatever it was.
And like you said, he never complains, but you know, Job, of course, I don't know, Job may be in a little bit worse shape with what he was going, but he never.
I don't know, Jack, you're in a pit, your brothers threw you there, and then they sold you to these slave traders, I don't know, he didn't have much left,
But I
really.
mean, he's not showing him complaining in there,
Right.
so I don't think, I would think he would have some bad thoughts.
Okay, it goes on in 41, in chapter 41, Pharaoh makes him great over all the land, put him in his ring and fine clothes and all that stuff. And then in verse 45, Joseph gets a wife. Pharaoh called Joseph's name, I don't have a clue how to say that, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. On's one of their other gods. And Joseph went out and over all the land of Egypt. Joseph gets a wife. What is she?
I don't know if she's a heathen. I assume if her,
She's an Egyptian for sure.
right, and then if she's followed in her father's footsteps, she would be a worshiper of false god On, I guess,
Yeah.
On.
And that makes her a Gentile.
Oh, yeah.
And anyhow, who's the bride of Christ? Christ gets a bride in the end. Who's the bride of Christ?
Well, the church,
Who's the church?
the believers.
Mostly Gentile believers.
That's what I was looking for. You know, in Romans 11, it talks about the Jews being blinded. The Jews can come to Christ the same way we have, the way we do. And but for the most part, the bride of Christ are Gentile believers. But like Kelly said, it would be the church. And verse 46 of chapter 41, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, went throughout all the land, and 7 years of plenty on the earth. You know, the earth bore more than they needed actually, and they put back 20% of it.
So like apparently 13 years have passed when all this took place.
Right. So,
Interesting.
like Kelly said, he was 17 when he went there. He's 30 when Pharaoh makes him number one in the nation after him, and gives him a wife, and then it goes on, and Joseph had 2 sons, and well, in verse 49, and Joseph gathered corn, which is grain, as the sand of the sea, very much until it left numbering, for it was without number. So they put up 20% and stored it. And then Joseph has the 2 sons before the 7 years of famine started. And the first one was Manasseh. And what Manasseh means, one who causes to forget is what Manasseh means. And then Ephraim means fruitful. And Joseph says, names Manasseh, because God made him forget all the bad stuff that had happened to him. Ephraim, he was fruitful and in the land of his affliction. So having the two sons help Joseph forget about all the bad things that has happened to him, and now he's on top of the world. I'm not sure, Joseph didn't feel that way though, I don't think he abused his power or let it go to his head. But this famine was not only in Egypt, it was all of the then known world. Everybody was in the same boat, so to speak.
Well, and also, I mean, he had all these things, but he still wasn't happy because he still pined for his family.
Yeah.
Of course, his brothers had betrayed him in the worst way possible, too.
Anything else, questions or comments?
Well, I'll go back to what Jack said about the baker. It says in the 40:23, yet did not the chief butler, remember Joseph, but forgot him. Now, it had to be a pretty big life event in the butler's life, right? The baker, he saw him killed and he was spared, and then he forgot. You wonder why, because all Joseph asked him was to bring him out of the house. I guess that happened eventually, but, and then why do you remember him? I mean, he just said, oh, how could you forget that, right? He said in the 41:9, it says, then spake the chief butler to Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Like,
Yeah.
so he suddenly remembered it. That doesn't make any sense to me. How he, how you could just forget something, a big life event like that, and disregard what Joseph asked you to do, and then when the Pharaoh has a dream, and I guess it's probably going to benefit the butler to bring Joseph to the Pharaoh. You would think you'd find favor with Pharaoh
Yeah.
for doing that, but anyway, it's odd to me.
Okay, 42, we pretty well need to read every verse too. Now, when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, corn's grain, Jacob said to his sons, why you look at one another, get your thumb out of your nose and go do something. He told them. And he said, behold, I've heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down there and buy some for us so we don't starve to death.
Now, how long a trip do you think that was? I mean, I realize we're not mapping it and
They're
driving it.
around Hebron and to Beersheba, I think is around 60 miles. And I don't know how far it is from Beersheba to Egypt, to where this took place.
Yeah, because I mean, from one side of Egypt to another would be pretty good travel depending on where they.
Yeah, so it had to been 140 or 50 miles. You know, on foot you can cover about 20 miles a day.
So it was a long trip, but really could have been a lot longer, I guess.
Well, I mean, they were loaded down with
Oh,
whatever he
that's
had
true.
to bring the grain back with them,
Yeah.
so there'd be several other critters with them.
Presumably you'd have to keep the critters happy too, like, fed and watered so that they could do what they need them to do, carry the stuff back. Must've been quite the entourage, I guess. And wouldn't you think they would have faced peril going there too? I mean, from robbers and.
Well, you'd have to wonder about that because everybody's without food.
Yeah, exactly, it'd be like open game.
Yeah.
We thought of that.
And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure mischief befall him. And the sons of Israel Israel and Jacob are the same, you interchange.
I was kind of taken by the way it did it too, like for verse to verse. In verse 1 it says Jacob, and verse 5 it says Israel. So if you weren't familiar with the Bible, that would be kind of confusing.
It would. Yep, I used to be real confused.
You know, I was thinking, why would Jacob favor Joseph and then Benjamin? I mean, I just got to think, well, he wanted to marry Rachel, he didn't want to marry any of these other people, so I mean, I understand, and then she doesn't have any of them until she dies with Benjamin, doesn't she?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
They were definitely his favorites, even though they were the youngest, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, the opposite's not supposed to be true, but I guess the oldest is supposed to be the most revered.
And that happens throughout the Bible when God's hands in it. The younger becomes first instead of as it's supposed to be, the oldest get the double portion of inheritance.
And that's a cultural thing, and that doesn't matter to God, obviously.
Right. Verse 5, and the sons of Israel come to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was governor over the land, and it was that sold to all the people. You know, how could one man handle all that? But Joseph is handling it all. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. So there's the first time we know that Jacob's dream came true, or Joseph's dream came true. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said to them, Whence come ye? And they said, From the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph knew his brothers, but they didn't know him. And Joseph remembered the dreams they dreamed of them, and said unto them, You are spies to see the nakedness of the land you are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's son. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. And if you look through that, 6 or 8 times it mentions them being spies.
Why do you think Joseph played it this way? He's playing the long game. I mean, that would be hard, wouldn't it? Either not lash out at him or not say, hey, you don't know who I am, do you? Look at me. My dreams came true.
But he really plays the game with them and goes on to call them spies.
would he change that much in that many years though? They wouldn't, that's another thing.
There has to be
You
something.
recognize your own brother?
There has to be something extra going on here that they couldn't recognize. Plus, he probably adopted the Egyptian look, I guess.
Right.
I've seen movies before where they had
Yeah.
in makeup and stuff and dressed up because the men would be adorned back then, I guess.
Well, I'm sure
At least
that
that's
they-
true, but
I'm sure they, in their belly dreams, they think that's their brother standing
well, that's true.
there.
too.
I
Yeah.
mean, even
And he
though
also
looks
spoke the
like-
language because they said they had an interpreter, right?
Right.
So he wasn't speaking their language.
Yeah, he really played it big.
I guess to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, see his dad and his brother, or is that kind of the
Yeah, and
end game?
as we all know, God's hands in it, and is the one that's calling the shots. And he said unto them, Nay, but we see the nakedness of the land you have come. And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with the father, and one is not. And I bet Joseph thought, I'm not. And Joseph said unto them, that is that I spake unto you, say you are spies. Hereby you shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely you are spies. And he put them all together into the ward, or into the prison, for 3 days. He's pretty rough on them, isn't he? And
They
Joseph,
threw him in the pit as kind of retribution.
Well, I don't think they liked him very well. I mean, again, they know they're from the land of Canaan, so
yeah,
I guess they know they're Jewish, right?
what, yeah,
And so they probably were, be like people from Mitchell come down here and asking for food. They probably were biased against them.
Well, all these people are biased against Mitchell Peak anyway, aren't you?
Well,
probably buys.
Well, I guess if they have to choose to starve to death or go to Egypt and be, persecuted or called out or whatever, or even put their life, I guess it's better than starving to death.
Anyhow, I think under God's guidance, Joseph is being pretty clever, and like Kelly said, he's playing the game. And
He's got to be remembering he's God the whole time he's there in Egypt, to be able to keep this faith. And
he knew where his blessings were coming from, didn't he? And Joseph said unto them the 3rd day, this do and live, for I fear God. If you be true men, let one of your brothers be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your house. For the famine, of your houses. So they're going to take corn back to feed everybody. And not only that, but they have animals. They have to have grain for their animals.
They don't have a semi either, do they? Like Jack said, they got a bunch of donkeys.
Just donkeys.
What, does the 3 days have any significance? Why would he leave them there 3 days? I mean, just,
There's a lot of numerics throughout the Bible. You know how many days was Christ in the grave, and all the different things, all the different numbers. Let's see, verse 20. But bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. And they said one to another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother. And they're beginning to have some remorse now, first signs of it that I know of. And that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, spake I not unto you? Reuben said, I told you so. Do not sin against the child, and you would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. And he turned himself about from them, and wept, and returned to them again, and communed with them, and took from them Simeon, and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph commanded to fill their sack with corn, and to restore every man his money into his sack. Why do you think he done that to begin with? It's just part of the game.
yeah, you would have thought it was like, maybe he's being like their benefactor, but then later on it turns out it scared him to death.
Yeah.
And they suffered because of it. But this is like their dirty big secret, right? What they did to their brother, and they're all having to live with that, which is, they should have to, but obviously it's weighed on them for this, 15 years now, or however long they've been there, 13 or 15 by the time they get there and do whatever. So it's really weighed on them that whole time. I think that they at least felt that remorse the way Reuben talks there. And apparently it's caused differences between them, you know, as to how they treated Joseph.
Yeah. Okay, they loaded up the donkeys with all the corn and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender in the inn, he espied his money, for behold, it was in the sack's mouth. So there they are with their money. And he said unto his brothers, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God has done to us? So now they're blaming God for what's going on. These little signs and hints along the way, you know, they should be picking up on this, and they are. And like Kelly said, they're beginning to fess up to their guilt and know what's being done. Any other questions or comment up to this? That blaming God, that happens a lot through their history. They blame God for all the bad stuff that goes on. Okay, let's see. Verse 29, and they came unto Jacob their father into the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell to them, saying, the man who is the Lord of the land spoke roughly to us, and took us for spies of the country. And we said to him, we are true men, we are no spies. You know, he repeats everything and tells Jacob all that happens. But, go ahead.
I don't know, I think that would go hard with me if I was in Joseph. We're honest men. I don't think they were too honest trying to kill their own brother and then decide to sell him as a slave. I don't know how much I'd put into that statement, but.
Yeah. And you gotta wonder what they done with the money, you know, how that played out. And in verse 35, they realize, or telling Jacob, I mixed those two up, Jacob and Joseph, but they tell Jacob they all got their money back. And Jacob, her father, said unto them, me have you bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, Simeon is not, and you will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Reuben speaks up again and says to his father, slay my two sons if I bring him not back to thee. That's pretty bold statement, isn't it? That, you know, especially coming from Reuben. Deliver him into my hands, and I will bring him to thee again. And he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in which you go, then you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. So Jacob saying it's going to kill me if all this stuff takes place. Anything to that point? The second visit, remember the little signs along the way. Should they have picked up on them? hindsight, we can see them, but I don't know, they're pretty, pretty well hid up to this point. You know, he's gonna seat them in order and do the different things that they pick up on. Okay, chapter 43 is the second visit.
And at any point, they could have told his dad what really happened about Joseph, right? They could have
They,
got that off their chest, but they're still letting him believe what they told him in the first place. So that lie is just festered for these decade or more.
I never thought about them fessing up at that time, they could have, but,
I mean, he's still obviously grieving, even mourning, even, of course, God knows he might have took them out behind the woodshed and did something bad to them.
Don't you think it's that
It
way
would
with,
fear, yeah,
yeah, go ahead, I didn't.
that's all right now.
I mean, if we, you know, if we get off course like, you know, these brothers did, and we don't ask for forgiveness and we've sinned, I think that it just keeps getting worse for us. I mean, I think it could happen the same way that it does for them, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and now they're starting to see remorse to the point, I don't know if it ever says they repent of what they've done, but, you know, we have to get to that point, or, you know, that's one thing when I sin, I worry about God's discipline, you know, that's hopefully keeps me in line, not all the time, but most of the time, so.
once in a while. Another thing you can see happening here, Jacob hasn't learned anything by favor, and Joseph, now he's favoring Benjamin. And, you know, he's turning all of his affection to Benjamin, in place of Joseph.
Well, and that, you know, you, as a father, you try not to show favor to your kids, right? Because of that very reason, because they'll resent the other one.
Yeah.
And it's just not the right thing to do, right? But he obviously didn't bother him, like you said. He's like, he openly, you know, said, basically, I mean, and they all thought that anyway, going back to the coat of many collars and, you know, and, of course, Joseph, I guess, brought some of that on himself with the dream interpretation. And you don't know how Joseph presented that,
No.
though. I mean, I guess he didn't feel like he could keep it himself, but was he humble when he told him, or was he like, fuck, who you guys, I'll be rolling over you pretty soon? You know, you don't know how, well, I can't imagine he was like that, but whatever it was, it didn't sit well with them.
You know, it's
Could've been
a
attitude,
run
too.
through the family type thing, cause Isaac favored Ishmael, and Rebecca favored, am I getting off, let's see.
I think it's back, I think you got it backwards.
Okay,
Jacob and Esau.
Yeah.
Jacob, it's, you know, the dad favored, Esau, and yeah, the mother favored.
Yeah. So you know,
It just doesn't go well in any family.
it doesn't, not when there's favorites. That's, we tell the grandkids, you're our favorite oldest granddaughter, or you're our favorite youngest, or the one named this or that, and, you know, you gotta make them all feel special, but not one more than another. Sounds like we've learned from their mistakes. And that's what Paul says in Romans 15:4. What was written beforehand, which was the Old Testament, was written for our learning. So he doesn't go on, but he could have said, so we don't make the same mistakes. Okay, we're gonna run out of time, so chapter 43, the famine is everywhere, and Jacob is quizzing his sons, you know, why did you tell them that you had another brother and stuff, and anyhow, Jacob ends up giving in and letting them take Benjamin back, and he sweetens the deal a little bit and sends some honey and nuts and different things. for a gift with Pharaoh. Let's see. They not only, took him a present, they took their first money back, plus they took double for the second. And anyhow, they took Benjamin with them. And let's see, verse 16, and when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of the house, bring these men home and slay and make ready for these men shall dine with me at noon. And the man did as Jacob bade, and they made a big feast for him and everything. And the men, the brothers ended up being afraid because they go into his house, and they came near to Joseph's steward, or the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, sir, we came indeed down the first time to buy food, and it come to pass when we came to the inn that we opened our sack, and behold," so he's telling the steward the story, to put a little bug in for them with Pharaoh, or not with Pharaoh, but with Joseph. And the steward says back to him in 23, "Peace be to you, fear not, your God and your God of your father hath given you treasure in your sack. I had your money, and you brought Simeon out to them." So he's telling them, I had your money, but I put it back in your sack. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and gave the donkeys food again, and they made ready the present against Joseph came at, the present against Joseph came at noon, for they heard the sound of eat bread. Let me start that again, try it again. And they made ready the present against Joseph came at noon, and they heard that they should eat bread there, and Joseph came home and brought the present which were in their hand into the house, and bowed themselves to him to the earth. And he asked them of their welfare, and he always asked about his father, the old man who he spake of. And he's well, and he lifted up his eyes and saw Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke unto me?" And he said, "God be gracious unto thee, my son." That's got to be different for the other Egyptians hearing Joseph speak about God like this. Made me wonder how he gets by with that when it's not one of Egypt's God. And Joseph made haste, for his vows did yearn upon his brothers, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into the chamber and wept there, and he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, "Set on bread." And here's another one of their clues they should have picked up on. He set them all in order, and they wondered about that, and that's in verse 33. And they served him food, but he gave Benjamin 5 times more than he did anybody else, and that takes care of 343.
How long do you think went between the two trips?
That's something I wondered about, because the brothers were dragging their feet about going back, and Jacob sure wasn't getting in a hurry to send Benjamin back, but finally they had to, because they were going to die if they didn't go get more food.
And I wonder
So
if Joseph thought, how could he know if they're coming back? And misplayed it, unless he has some insight that they didn't have or knew God was gonna take care of it. Of course, I guess he could find him now if he wanted to, I suppose. I guess he could have always found him maybe, but now that he's got this power, he could have done whatever he pleased, apparently.
It makes us ask a lot of questions, doesn't it?
But again, he was playing the long game, and apparently
Yeah.
had some insight that maybe we didn't have, or don't have.
Well, in 43, verse 10, it says, "For if we had not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice." So it couldn't have been a far distance, I would think.
Couldn't be what?
It couldn't have been a far, I mean, it wouldn't have taken them a long time, I wouldn't think, if, I don't know.
No, but they ate all the food they take. It seemed like to me it would have been at least a month or maybe a little longer. I don't know whether it was or not.
Would they spare their livestock and not eat it just because they would need it in the long run, or because it would seem that might be a burden because you gotta feed it? And that's grain or whatever that you can use to feed yourself. And obviously that was the biggest commodity that was available was the grain, because that's what made Joseph and through him the Pharaoh was richer.
And that's another thing, you know, you think in the wilderness, the wandering in the wilderness, they had herds then. Why did they not eat them? That, why didn't they eat their cattle and sheep and whatever they had? But, I guess they knew if they eat them, they was gonna die in the end anyhow, but.
Well, of course, I mean, if you're eating them to a point where they can't reproduce enough, then you're eventually gonna run out of that food too,
Right.
I guess.
Yep. Okay, chapter 44, 1-5. And he commanded the steward of the house, saying, "Fill the men's sack with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in their sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money." So he's putting all the money back, plus in Benjamin's sack, he's putting his silver cup. And he did according to the words that Joseph had spoken. As soon as morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses. And when they were gone out of the city, and yet not far, Joseph said unto his steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have you rewarded evil for good? Is not this in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he dealeth it, yet does evil in so doing." So, I don't know, I didn't understand why the dealing was put in there, which, except it would make the cup seem more important. But anyhow, why do you think Joseph would do that? Why would he put the cup in Benjamin's sack and make it look like Benjamin stole from him after he treated him so good, giving them food and all, feeding them lunch?
I guess he was testing them again, I suppose. Testing not only see how honest they would be, but if they would throw Benjamin under the bus like they did him. That's the only thing, that's what comes to my mind.
That's the same thing that come to my mind, you know.
See if they changed in these last.
Yeah. Have they changed, or are they gonna treat Benjamin the same way they did me?
They got what they came for, so now who cares about little brother?
Yeah. Was Joseph surprised at the outcome? I don't know either.
I think he had some I think he had some divine insight into what was gonna happen.
He did. I think so too, Kelly. Okay, so they go through all that, with the money and, you know, why would we steal? And verse 11, then they speedily took down every man's sack and searched all of it. They found a cup in Benjamin's, and then Judah said, what shall we say unto the Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found our iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. And before that, I think Reuben said, somebody said, kill whoever has it. But anyhow, I'm trying to hurry to get through this, and I'm still not gonna make it. So they find it in Benjamin's sack, and they all go back and basically plead their case before Joseph. And
Wouldn't they have thought, well, this happened before? So, I mean, to me, you'd think that this just happened a few months ago or a year ago or whatever.
yeah,
And you're thinking, well, what is going on? You know, because they know they didn't steal the money, right?
right.
And the steward just told them, I put the money back in there, so they thinking, well, he did that again, right? I guess that would be human nature, wouldn't it, to think that?
You'd think,
But this seemed awful familiar to me. How else is the money back there, so? And the silver cup, I guess, is a little different story, because Benjamin hadn't happened to him, even though he must have been privy to what happened to the rest of them, first trip. Sorry.
that, anyhow, they go back before Joseph, and finally Joseph does reveal himself to him in chapter 45. We need to read 45 also, if we can get through all of it. Then Joseph couldn't refrain himself before all of them, and stood by him, and he cried, and he calls every man, all the Egyptians go out, and there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brother. And he wept aloud, and all the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brother, I am Joseph, does my father yet live? And his brothers could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph, troubled a little bit, huh? And Joseph said unto his brothers, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, who you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither, for God did send me here before you to preserve life. And these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and there are 5 years left. Let's see. Trying to see what I can skip. I don't think we can skip this. The 2 years of famine has passed, and there are 5 years in which there shall neither be ear nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve your posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it is not you that has sent me hither, but God. He totally lets them off the hook then, and tells them that it was God that sent him there. And this is a big parallel with Christ, the preserving life and the deliverance. And so now it was not you that sent me hither, God, and he made me the father to Pharaoh. How was he a father to Pharaoh?
I don't understand that term of phrase either, I mean, other than being in charge of his,
That-
seems like it'd be more like a son, but.
Right, it would, but the the son don't advise the fathers. He was advising Pharaoh, is the way I took it. Made him like a father to him, or a grandfather would advise the son or grandson. Verse 9, hasten ye and go up to my father and say to him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children and thy children's children, thy flock and thy herd, and all that they have. And there will I nourish thee, and yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all thou hast come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh to you. He's kind of saying, do you believe me yet? It is me, and I'm speaking all this to you.
Yeah, how much younger was Benjamin than Joseph? Was he even around when Joseph was
He was
sold?
Yeah, he was young. Like Jack said, let's see, I don't know how old he would have been.
I mean, he would have been like infant, right?
Yeah,
One?
yeah, really young.
I mean, what do you think that he realized the providence of God was in this? I didn't really say, but I mean, does he get his eyes open when you see his family coming, his brothers, or?
I think Joseph's seeing God's providence all through it.
Okay.
I'm like Kelly. I think he has a godly insight in it all. Let's see, verse 13, and you shall tell my father all my glory in Egypt and all that you have seen, and you shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all of his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. And I didn't understand that, because we know that Pharaoh didn't like the Hebrews. They didn't like sheep herders, but it pleased him. So I didn't understand that.
Well, yeah, because he just told them a few verses before not to tell them they were sheep herders, didn't he?
Yep.
And then they told him. I read that, well, just before I came here, and I'm like, what? What's up with that? And why would they do that when Joseph just told them not to? I mean, I guess it's better to be a cattle farmer than a shepherd.
Evidently.
I don't know.
And Pharaoh even says, if there's some that can do a better job with my cattle, take my cattle and for the Hebrews to take care of them. So Joseph sends them back after their father, and we'll just go ahead to 46. And Israel, that's Jacob, took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifice unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in a vision of the night and said unto Jacob, said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. So everything's changed. Before they were not supposed to go to Egypt, and now he tells them to fear not to go, that I'll make you a great nation. While you're there. And not only that, I'll go down with thee into Egypt, and will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph put his hand upon thine eyes. That's another custom. Joseph would be there at his death and close his eyes. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and all the little ones, and tells who all went, and it lists their names, and
I got a little ahead of myself, because it's not talking about that till the end of this chapter.
I knew what you meant.
Okay.
And all the souls that came with Jacob to Egypt, which came out of the loins besides Jacob's sons, wives, all the souls were 70. So there was 70 people, Israelites, went to Egypt. And out of 70 people, God made a nation. So, why did God do all this? Take them to Egypt. They were there in captivity and led them out again like he said he was going to do. Why did the 70 people not just take the land?
Because that's not the way God wanted to do it.
Good answer. There was, I thought of two reasons. 70 people wouldn't make a nation and couldn't take over the whole land, the whole promised land. So he had to make them a big people. And then in Genesis 15:16. And I'll start in 15. And thou shalt go to thy father in peace, thou shalt be buried in good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. God had to give the Amorites, all the people in the promised land, ample time to change their ways and turn to God, which God knew they wasn't going to do. We know they didn't do, because he destroyed the Canaanites. So God gave the Canaanite people another 400 years to change their ways, so to speak.
And I think one reason they went to Goshen, they didn't like sheep herders, so they didn't really assimilate with the Egyptian people, so God wanted it that way, obviously.
Right. God did keep them separated. And if it wasn't a God thing, why did Pharaoh give them the richest, best ground in Egypt? You know, it's all the delta area and all well water. And, but anyhow, he gave them the best land. What else in 46? Okay, to sum this up some, to verse, or chapter 47, Joseph in the 7 years of famine put back 20%. To have for the 7 years of famine, and even that went into law after this. It talks about that in chapter 47, that Joseph made a law that, in other words, a flat tax, everybody paid 20% payroll. I got ahead of myself. It talks about in 47, after the famine was was hard on the people and on everybody that, they bought grain, they spent all their money. And then Joseph took their cattle and stuff to give them food. And, then the people come before him and said, you know, we don't have anything less but our bodies and our land. So, he took their land and allowed them to work it. So Pharaoh owned everything because of what Joseph had him do and set in motion. In chapter 48, Jacob blesses Joseph's two sons, and as talked about earlier, he blesses the younger over the eldest son, Ephraim over Manasseh. And Joseph tried to change it, but he evidently, Jacob had some insight too, that he knew what he was doing and was following God's plan. Anything else in chapter 48? Okay, 49, Jacob blesses each one of his sons individually, and Jack talked about Reuben taking one of Jacob's wife, Bilhah, and so he lost his first place, and Jacob said he would be like a boiling pot. He which, you know, was kind of out of control, and goes through each one's and blesses them. And what I don't understand, when they do this, all this stuff comes about, you know. Of course, we know God's hands in all of it, but I don't, names don't mean that much to us anymore, but everyone's name has a meaning, and the meaning of their name comes true about them. And in chapter 50, which is the last chapter, Jacob is taken back to the land after he dies. They actually mummified him and put him in it says a coffin, but it's actually a mummy case, like you've seen the pharaohs and stuff. And they make a big deal about it. And anyhow, they take him back to the promised land. And I need to read 15 through 20. This, in my Bible, headed the last days of Joseph. And when Joseph's brethren saw the father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure perhaps hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we have did to him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall you say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespasses of thy brethren, and their sin, for they did evil unto you. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespasses of thy servants, of God, of thy father. And Joseph wept. You know, how did that make him? They sent a lie to him. How did that make him feel? You know, and it says it made him wet, made him weep. For Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in God's place? In other words, Joseph said, I'm not the judge. It's not for me to judge you with the things that I done. And Joseph dwelled in Egypt, and father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And where 2 or 3 minutes passed, I made it, we ended Genesis. And it's bad to hurry through this, but I wanted to finish Genesis so we could jump to the New Testament and start a new study.
Well, how many comparatives did you find between Joseph and
Oh,
Christ?
I didn't count
You
them.
counted.
You know, Joseph was exiled into Egypt, and when Christ came, he was exiled back to heaven, to his father's right hand. The forgiveness and restoring, not the first time, but the second time. You know, he reveals himself to him. Who's Christ going to reveal himself to when he comes back? Yep. So there's, let's see, the deliverance, we talked about that. I don't know, I've got 7, 8, 9, 10. I've got 10 or 11, I guess, but I've looked at this a lot, and every time I go through it, I find another one. But anyhow, this is Genesis. The reason I picked Genesis to start the Bible study, if you don't understand the beginning, you're definitely not going to understand the end or the middle either. And to understand where God's people come from, and he didn't choose them because they were somebody special. He chose them because he wanted the people to love and honor him. Questions or comments? Okay. I'll get some literature, or not literature, but verses and stuff together, and give you a handout before we start the next study. I haven't got it made yet, but what I would like to do is look at all the mysteries that the Bible speaks about, and that primarily mysteries mentioned in Matthew and Paul's writings and Revelation, I think. Anyhow, I'd like to study that, and I'll give you some verses and stuff to study. I appreciate you all coming.
Thanks for having us.
Hope you'll come again. Let's close in prayer. Father, it's so good to get together with you in our midst, and to be able to read your word and know that you have written it for our learning. You want us to understand